did it. We're back. I always love the beginning of these because producer Scott and I just sit here and talk to each other through the chat. And he's like, you're doing it all wrong. And I'm like, oh, sorry. Let me go back. Take two. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sarah Levinger. I help people apply psychology to their brand across the board, specifically when it comes to your ads. But luckily, psychology applies to basically everything everywhere. So that's something you're interested in. Definitely keep listening. I'm sorry I sound sick. I get it from my children. They're germy. Anybody of you that have kids understand they're just germy. Like everything is sticky and I don't know how to handle it. But today we're going to talk about something really interesting that I see almost nobody talking about, which is really interesting because I feel like it's something that everyone uses incorrectly. I'm sorry. Just sorry up front. You don't use it like necessarily incorrectly, but most of the time when I do audits for brands, I see people using this incorrectly. So today we're going to talk about the post-purchase survey. And I think it's producer Scotty's like, nice job shaming everyone. Sorry. It's my job to be polarizing. The post-purchase survey. I truly believe that this is one entity within D2C and within any brand that is just a key player in your research stack, right? It's really important to get good research on your customers. And the post-purchase survey in particular is basically a modern day focus group, right? It's the one entity where you have full control over getting any sort of like feedback from your customers on a real-time basis. Incredibly important part of the entirety of your tech stack, I would say. But the interesting part about post-purchase surveys is I am a little on the fence with how we currently use them. I love them, but we don't quite use them in the way that I wish we would. Post-purchase surveys are tough because there's an entire discipline. I would love everyone to know. There's an entire discipline where there's teams of researchers that are studying how to build post-purchase survey questions correctly. And the reason they're doing this is because most of the time, the way you ask the question will bring back a very different answer. So, great example. I can ask my husband, did you take out the trash? And his answer would probably be, no, not yet. Or I can ask my husband, did you take out the trash? His answer is going to be very, very different. Now, obviously, that's inflection, right? Spoken questions are very different depending on how you change the inflection. But questions that are actually in textual format have the same issue. Most of the time when you read a question on a post-purchase survey like platform, you can't tell exactly what the person who wrote the question is trying to ask you, right? Because everybody's going to interpret it just a little bit differently depending on what the question is. So here's what I want us to do this year. I really would like us to start building our post-purchase survey questions based upon psychology and science. Now, I need to do a lot more research into this because I've read quite a few studies on these post-purchase survey questions and how you're supposed to frame them. But the most interesting part that I see is that most brands will take default survey questions and just blanket them on everything, right? So the questions I see most often, usually, what did you think about our product, right? That's a very big one that comes up all the time. And what do you think is not a great way to frame it because nobody knows what they think. They might be able to tell you what they think, but usually it's just what they think you want them to say. Secondary one to this is almost always, where did you hear about us? Like, where did you find us? If you could change something about your experience, what would it be? These questions are great, but they don't get to the heart of what we really need to discover about our customers, which is psychologically, what were you feeling? What were you actually, emotionally going through during the post-purchase process or during the purchase process? So here's how I would rather us build these surveys. And this is based on basically a psychology model that talks about the fact that the brain builds everything in stories, right? Your brain is heavily addicted to its own narrative. And so everything that it thinks is usually some sort of a story that it's been telling itself for a really long time. So very first thing we should do is start using a lot more metaphor in our survey questions. And that may sound strange because you're like, Sarah, what do you mean metaphor? Like I have to use like hypothetical questions. When I talk about metaphor, I want you to compare your product, experience, service, brand to something that the customer already has a knowledge of and can draw up information on quickly. So great example. If you really want to go after like identifying some of these core emotions that your customers experience, ask them the question, if our product was a movie, which movie would it be and why? Again, we're using metaphor to try and help our customers pull out emotion instead of logical thinking. And I talk about this in a few different places on Twitter and everywhere else, but I don't believe it's always a good thing to try and get your customers to think logically, because 95% of our processing power comes out of the subconscious mind. That's the one we don't have access to very easily. That's the one that's highly emotional. It's very old and it's built entirely on stories and experiences. The subconscious mind will process everything that we are currently experiencing, from what we're smelling to who we're interacting with, what our environment is like, the person we just met. Like it takes in all of that information 24/7, processes it at 11 million bits per second, and then shoves anything that's important to the conscious mind. Now, the conscious is real slow. He's a great thinker, but like it just takes him a minute. The conscious mind only processes information at about 40 to 50 bits per second. It's like kind of a toaster level, right? Just kind of chugging along. The interesting part about this, though, is we need the conscious mind to actually pull in new information and process it as we sleep into the subconscious, so the subconscious can decide if it's important or not. Now, back to this question. If you are able to phrase any of this information in a metaphorical sense and give people context, right, for what you want them to answer with, you'll have a better chance of actually activating that subconscious emotional part of themselves so that they can give you a little bit more data on what they feel and less data on what they think. More data on what they feel, less data on what they think. So, if our product were a movie, which one would it be and why? Kind of just illustrates that emotional tone and their overall association. If they come back and say your product is Superman and it's because it's powerful and it takes care of everything, now you have a little bit more context as to what they actually think about your brand and your product. Secondary question to this: if you really want to explore like personal connections, right, with your brand, I want you to ask this question. If our product were a friend, what kind of personality would it have? Or another question you could ask: if our product were like a high school personality, which high school personality would it be? Now, for this question, you could actually have a preset group, right? So it wouldn't be open ended. You could do multiple choice. If our product were a friend, is she the preppy one? Is she the kind one? Is she kind of sassy? Is she bossy? Right? You could have a preset group of multiple choice if you really needed to make it easier for like post analysis. But this one in particular uses metaphor to help people create some sort of an emotional connection with somebody they already know. This also helps you understand, do we actually have a personal connection with our customers? Because if they come back and they can't give you an answer, it's a pretty good insight that maybe we need to work a little bit more on building connection. Third question here. If you really want to visualize kind of how your product, has impacted your customers, lead with this question. Ask them, if our product were a trip, what kind of adventure would it be? So we're trying to understand transformational experience with this question. And again, it helps to use metaphor. We're trying really hard to get them to pull out of that logical mind, go into the emotional mind, and figure out what kind of trip. Because if they say, it's a 17-day long trip through the mountains where I have to camp at several spots and it's raining the whole time, maybe we're making it a little too hard to get our product in there. Like, you know what I'm saying? If they come back and say, oh my gosh, it's a beach vacation, all inclusive that I didn't have to plan, oh, that would be the best answer you could possibly get, because it shows you the emotional experience that they're having around your product. Okay, so question number 4, assess your product's role. This is pretty important, I think, for anybody that's trying to figure out how do we fit in the daily lives of our customer. So I want you to ask this question. If our products were a character in a novel, which character would it be and why? I like this one because it helps identify a little bit better how they see your product fitting into their daily lives. If they come back and say Harry Potter, like your product is Harry Potter, and it just because it's magic and he's able to just like fix everything, and he's always there for me, and he just has like a good trustworthy character, fantastic. If they come back and say you are literally like, I don't know, What's a bad character, producer Scotty? What's like an evil character from a movie? Like, you're the sea witch from like Little Mermaid. Then we got a problem. Oh, you Voldemort. That's a good. You see, it's Friday. I'm tired. Anyways, depending on which character they answer with, it would be really interesting to see what comes out of these kind of metaphorical survey questions, because we're tapping into the emotional mind, getting into that emotional brain, helping them understand how they actually feel about your brand and your product, instead of just asking these logical questions that they're just going to kind of like spoon feed back to you based upon what they think you want to hear. And the last question here, if you really want to help them kind of imagine a different context for things, ask them the question: if our product were an essential tool in a superhero utility belt, what would it be used for, right? Could you fly with it? Could you become invisible with it? Could you like change the world with it? What could you do with our product if it was like a superhero tool? I love this question because it really just helps identify the key functions that they're emotionally attached to already. And again, all of these questions, if you really want to make it quick and easy for you, go ahead and just make them multiple choice. Choose ones that you think are pretty close, and then see how the data comes back and adjust them from there. I think it's integral that this year, especially as a brand, we take the time to stop using so many logical questions and stop speaking to the conscious brain and start using this kind of metaphor, story, very narrative focused, emotional questionnaire to help people kind of tap into that subconscious. Because at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is get as close as we can to the emotions, because emotions are what drive behavior. If you want to learn more, you can follow me basically anywhere at Sarah Levinger. It's at SarahLevinger at Sarah Levinger. Basically on every platform now. I'm trying to kind of branch out and get better about posting everywhere. And then you can also go to sarahlevinger.co and check it out over there. I've got a ton of all of my previous newsletters. If you want to sign up to the newsletter, I also kind of break down some of the bigger brands' psychological tactics and strategies if you want to steal what they're doing. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
The Brain Driven Brands podcast is part of the Learn and Laugh series on the Quickfire Podcast Network.